Season 3 begins with Galaxy 4. Now, Galaxy 4, I know nothing about it, apart from it's got loads of sexy women in it. Isn't released on any visual. I'll say visual from now on for DVD or video. Simply because it got deleted back in the 70s or whenever it was. And I haven't read the books or listened to the audio, so I'm going to have to skip this one as I don't know nothing about it. Mission to the Unknown, as far as I'm aware, is a one-episode story, which is a build-up story for the later on Daleks master plan, and it's about the Daleks basically forming an alliance with a lot of space baddies, and they're going to conquer the world. And a guy called Mavic Chen is involved, and you later on see him in a story. Again, it's not available on visual, not really. Only bits of it is, but from what I've seen and heard, it sounds rather good, so it's probably worth finding out as much as you can about this story. But I won't rate it as I haven't seen the whole thing, so it wouldn't be fair. The next story is The Myth Makers. No idea about it because there's no visual, so I'm going to skip Myth Makers straight away. Move on to the Daleks Master Plan. The Daleks Master Plan is a very, very long story. I think it's got 12 episodes, the longest Dalek story they ever made. And it is basically the Daleks trying to conquer various places. I think there's a companion called Sarah Kingdom, and she dies in it as well, which is a bit of a shame for her, I'm sure. Not really sure about everything because there's only about 2 or 3 episodes that actually exist. But from what I've seen and heard, it sounds good. But again, I'm not going to rate it because it wouldn't be fair. If you enjoy these stories and you've seen them or listened to the audio, then let me know and let me know if it's worth me checking it out. The next story is The Massacre, also known as The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve or something like that. No visual, no comment. Basically, I know nothing about this story. The next one is The Ark. The Ark is a very good story, although Dodo's in it, and I ain't a fan of Dodo, the companion. But the Doctor and his companions land on this Ark, which is basically the humans are moving to a new planet because Earth is dying, and they have monoids with them, and they're slaves. Dodo spreads her cold, and a few humans and monoids die, but the Doctor solves the problem. They fly away, but they land again, this time in the future. Now the monoids have taken over and the humans are slaves, and it's a fantastic story, one of my favourites, and I rate it 8.5 out of 10. It's worth you watching. It's very interesting and entertaining, a very good idea for a story. The next story is The Celestial Toymaker. Again, not much visual involved for this one. I think only episode 4 exists. From what I've seen of it, it's very, very good. I wish there was more of it. But I won't rate it because it's not fair. The Gunfighters. The Gunfighters is a barrel of laughs. See what I did then? Barrel of laughs with a gun barrel. Yes, very funny. Thoroughly enjoyable. Got characters like Doc Holliday in it, and I love cowboy films. And the Gunfighters to me was always good. I rate it 8.5 out of 10. Doctor basically wants to go to a dentist and ends up in a western, and it's a fascinating story, worth watching, definitely. Next story is The Savages. I know nothing about The Savages. There's no visual, so there's nothing for me to say about it. The War Machines is the next story. The War Machines, although it's a good story and it stands on its own 2 feet, I think the War Machines were too much like Daleks and perhaps a little bit too uninventive, perhaps. But basically, this company makes these machines and they want to take over the world. And they fail because the Doctor interrupts their plans. One good thing about it is Ben and Polly are introduced, and I think Dodo leaves. That's cool. We don't see much of Ben and Polly. Season 4 begins with the Smugglers. Don't know nothing about it, so again, I'll leave it blank. Finally, the 10th planet sees the first Doctor disappear and turn into the second Doctor. It also invites us to see the Cybermen for the first time, which is fascinating because I love the Cybermen. Um, Again, there's a couple of episodes. I think the last episode is missing, but it's a good story, and I'd rate it 8 out of 10 because of its iconic status, and I've always enjoyed it. You get to see Mondas being destroyed, which gets talked about a lot in the new series, and it's very informative. So, if you haven't already seen The 10th Planet, I recommend that you go and see it. Okay, so now we're moving on to the second Doctor. He had 3 seasons, and we begin with season 4, The Power of the Daleks. Not much is known about this story, for me anyway, visually, because it doesn't really, exist visually anymore. A couple of, I think like the first episode or the third episode exists, which I've seen snippets of. It's unfair for me to review it too much, but basically, yeah, I can't really. I'm looking at listening to this one on audio at some point in my life, so then I'll be able to give you some more information about it. The next few stories, again, they're all a little bit hickledy-pickledy because they don't really exist much. For Highlanders, I'm guessing it's got something to do with Jamie McCrimmon. But yeah, the Highlanders, I know nothing about it. The Underwater Menace, I've seen parts, like some clips of it. The rest of it doesn't exist. It's about these fish people. Enough said, really. Not my favourite type of thing to be watching. And we begin after that with the Moon Base, which is a Cyberman story, and it's a fascinating story. Again, visually, it doesn't all exist. Most of Pat Troughton's stories don't exist, which is a shame because he's one of my favourites. But yeah, the Moon Base, Cybermen basically want to take over this Moon Base so they can take over the world. Good story, recommend you watching it. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. It's just a shame it doesn't exist in its entirety. The Macra Terror, I know the Macra are in it, and that's about all I know about it, so I will be leaving that one alone because there's no visual. The Faceless Ones, there's no visual, so skip that one. The Evil of the Daleks, not much visual exists to this one either, but from what I've seen and heard, it does sound very good. Recommend you see as much of it as you can and also listen to it on audio, because I'm sure that's awesome. But as a review goes, it's not really fair to give it a rating because I haven't seen it all. Season 5 begins with a Tomb of the Cybermen. Fantastic story. It gets a smacking, whooping 9.5 out of 10. You get to see the planet Telos for the first time, and basically the Doctor and his companions land. They meet some scientists, and they all basically discover the Tomb of the Cybermen. And it's a very powerful, brilliant story. Definitely recommend you watch that one as soon as you can. The Abominable Snowmen, which is all about the Yeti. I haven't seen it, there's no visual, apart from a few clips, maybe an episode or 2 here and there. I'll skip that one. The Ice Warriors is another fantastic story. It introduces us to the Ice Warriors very well, I must say. When you first see the Ice Warrior in the ice, you're thinking, oh wow, it's quite a compelling story. A couple of episodes don't exist anymore, but it doesn't really deter from the story as they've got audio description. 8 out of 10 for the Ice Warriors, so I thoroughly enjoy that story. Then we move on to the Enemy of the World, which I don't really know much about again because there's no visual. I know I'm repeating myself here, but once we get on to the third Doctor, there's obviously visual all the way, so that's awesome. Enemy of the World, I think there's a doppelganger that looks like Pat Troughton, and that's about all I know of that story. Web of Fear is the introduction of the Brigadier, or Sergeant, or Corporal. I think is he Corporal? Or, yeah. And it's the Yeti in the underground, and that's about all I know. There's not much visual for this one. Recently, or a couple of years ago, they discovered, I think, one episode of it, the first episode, which they actually televised on BBC One, which is really cool. That was a long time ago, though. And then we have Fury from the Deep, which I know nothing about, really. So we'll skip that one, as there's no